on the Indonesia protests and the earthquake in Afghanistan that consumed about 800 lives, with about 3,000 or more, impacting 12,000. We have Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, who is an international analyst. He joins us now from London. Marek, glad to have you join us. Fine. Let's start. Yes. Let's start with the protests in Indonesia. Interestingly, the president has made a U-turn over this. What more do we know?
Well, the key point is that the protests have been growing in force, and the president has decided, as you rightly said, to make a U-turn. Whether this will save the situation is another matter. There is a law, a political law about this, that the worst moment for a bad government is when it starts to reform itself, because then there are signs of weakness, and therefore the protests actually accelerate. So it remains to be seen whether this U-turn will help.
The people are crying out for reforms that will get the leaders really working for the people. It's not just about, according to them, a short-term or long-term solution. It's about reforms.
Quite right. The point is that Indonesia is, well, as other countries, not very well run, in the sense that there is an elite, and the reforms are wanted by many people to try and give other people also a chance to try and make the economy better, increase freedom. However, in many countries, such demands are stifled. The question here is whether they will succeed. We've recalled, for example, there were protests in Georgia, but they've fizzled out. On the other hand, sometimes the protests work, especially if there's a democratic vote, as was shown in Romania. Here is the U-turn, which is the significant one, which implies that the government is accepting that some sort of reform is needed.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, what is the state of the rule of law in Indonesia? Because the people are saying that, from what they are saying, it looks like they're crying out against a government of impunity by those in authority.
Yeah, there is an elite which runs the government, which is in effect above the law. And this is a popular movement against this. Such movements have occurred before. Whether they succeed is another matter. Often all that happens is there's a change in the elite, that's all, so to speak. However, there has been a U-turn. Reforms like this, which the protesters are demanding, would make a change if they could be actually implemented. But it remains to be seen whether this will be done.
Yeah, it remains to be seen whether they have political will. Well, on the one hand, the government has made a U-turn, like we've been discussing. But then on the other hand, Marek, they are threatening those who are protesting. What can you tell us about this?
This would imply that the U-turn is more cosmetic than one would hope for, because what's happening is they're making a U-turn to take some of the sting out of the protest, while simultaneously, so to speak, preparing the ground for a crackdown. The implication is that the protests, whilst they've been given their head, will eventually be crushed. However, the fact there's been a U-turn at all, instead of just an open threat, means there is a possibility, slim though it be, that the protests will succeed.
Now let's turn to the earthquake in Afghanistan, 6 magnitude earthquake that has consumed about 800 lives, and then about 3,000 or so injured. Is it still at 800? Do we know whether the numbers have increased? Because, I mean, the talk was that eventually these numbers might just increase.
Well, usually with earthquakes, fortunately, there are people who are buried. And so therefore the initial numbers are very much often an underestimate. It would not surprise me that eventually the number tops 1,000, simply because not all people have been accounted for. Either way, it is, of course, a tragedy for Afghanistan, but the problem is we still don't have a full measure of how many people's lives were lost.
Do We know what the rescue operation has been like since the earthquake on Sunday.
There is a rescue operation of sorts, but of course, Afghanistan is a poor country, and insofar as it can do anything, it can do the basic, if you like, looking for people about that and slowly rebuilding. It is not a rescue operation with the full Western technology, and therefore, as a result, unfortunately, some people will die who need not have died in the sense where they found earlier, then they might have survived.
Now that raises the issue, what the world is doing. Now you talked about Afghanistan being a poor country and the fact of not having the right equipment to deal with this kind of issue. Is help coming from anywhere around the world to help them with the rescue operation? You know?
It's hard to see people volunteering around the world. America got a bloody nose in Afghanistan, so did Russia. A long time ago, incidentally, so did Great Britain. And so, in the case of America and Russia, who are the more obvious choices, they're unlikely to be enthusiastic about helping the Afghans. Moreover, the government there is not to the taste of Western Europe. To say it is one of the most illiberal ones in the world in Afghanistan. So therefore, there will be unlikely to be people volunteering. And moreover, Afghans themselves, I don't think will be welcoming Western aid. And so as a result, I don't think the world will be doing much to help. And other countries, of course, simply don't have the resources to help Afghanistan.
And that's not quite a good news, because then that might increase the number of casualties and those injured. Now, what's the government saying? Have they spoken? And even the rescue organizations, what are they particularly saying?
Well, the point about it is that the government is not very effectual in such matters. It's really the people doing things by themselves. It would be nice to see the Afghan government bringing in help, asking for it, but they don't want that really. And so therefore, the government, if you like, plays a sort of secondary role initially. It is literally down to people nearby helping themselves and helping their friends and family. And as a result, as we stated, more people would die or be more badly injured than would otherwise be the case. However, they will, of course, eventually cope, and it is to be hoped sooner rather than later.
Well, Ocha is saying that as many as 12,000 have been impacted. That cannot only be those dead and just those injured. What kind of impact are they talking about here? Maybe properties destroyed, houses destroyed, and people that need help.
Yeah, when you say property destroyed, it's very important to realize one of the strange aspects of third world countries which are reminiscent of Eastern Europe, and for example, also last century, in the sense that since the houses are not over elaborate and very expensive, they're relatively cheap to rebuild. And so one hears, for example, of flooding, for example, in Poland, or earthquakes in Afghanistan, and you think that's going to be rubble for centuries on end. But in fact, they're relatively quickly rebuilt. The people are used to work. They do a lot of the work in the house themselves, that is rebuilding. And so the average citizen there is far more, say, of a builder than in Western Europe or in America, where you'd have to bring in companies to do this. So the destruction is not as serious as it would be were it, say, New York to be struck by an earthquake. There, rebuilding New York really would be difficult. But Afghan, I think you'll find in a relatively short space of time, they'll be able to rebuild to the state they were before.
All right, before I let you go, just one more question on the Indonesia protest. What the people have been able to achieve with the U-turn, how does this speak to democracy? Of course, you know, democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that democracies, I'm afraid, have an ideal which not all countries live up to. And therefore, in practice, some democracies simply don't function in the sense that democracy should function as we think about it for the people, by the people. And it is not, unfortunately, the case in many countries where what happens in the group, see, in effect, takes power, takes the government, and the democratic aspect of it is simply, if you like, impotent to change situations, except in the case of a mass protest like this, which, since the time of the French Revolution, has indeed changed situations.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, international affairs analyst, speaking on the Indonesian protest and, of course, the Afghan earthquake from London. Thank you so much.